Okay, let's get started. This is Kyle Welch with RCR Wireless News. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, The Smart RAN, Trends in the Optimization of Spectrum and Network Resource Utilization, presented in conjunction with Monica Polini and SENZA FILI Consulting. Monica Polini, our presenter today, is the founder and president of SENZA FILI Consulting. Aside from being a frequent speaker at some of the leading industry events, Monica has also helped clients worldwide to understand technology and customer requirements. Additionally, Monica holds a PhD in cognitive science from the University of California, San Diego, an MBA from the University of Oxford, and a BA/MA in philosophy from the University of Bologna. We're truly lucky to have Monica here today to talk about some of the trends we're seeing in RAN today. At this time, I'd like to pass the presentation over to Monica.
Kyle, thanks a lot for the introduction, and glad to be here talking to you and to give you an introduction to the next report that is coming out soon. So the report will be out on December the 1st. And as previous reports, there is going to be an analyst report on RAN optimization and interviews with the sponsors and 3 operator interviews. And this is another report that was quite a lot of fun to write because it's a topic that might seem a little bit, specialistic, but it's very focused, a niche topic. But it's actually one that it's becoming very important, and it takes into account a lot of the evolution in the network. So it was very interesting to work on this. And I would like to thank all the sponsors that are listed here for making this possible and for making it possible to write and then to share it with you on, again, December the 1st. So let me get started on the initial presentation. And what I will do in this webinar, I will start giving you an overview of the topics discussed in the report, although the report obviously will go into much more depth. And then I will give you a short overview of the interviews so that you know what else is going to be in the report. So the RAN optimization, it's undergoing a lot of changes. And RAN optimization is nothing new. Operators have been trying to optimize the RAN since the first mobile network went up, of course. So there's always, you always want to have your network to work the best it can. But what is changing is basically how you define what's the best performance of the network. So what it used to be that you try to maximize the number of voice calls, the quality of the voice calls, or the capacity of the network. And could be measured in MOS or LANgs, bits per second, whichever measure. It was pretty much a linear, an attempt to linearly achieve the maximum performance along a few dimensions. And so it was pretty clear what to optimize for. But what is changing right now is what is the target of the optimization. So you still want to optimize, but the question is what you want to optimize for. And the answer is no longer a clear, obvious one that it's you want to optimize those KPIs. You might optimize those KPIs, and you still might not have the type of behavior from your network that you want. So the equation is different, even though you're trying to achieve to get as much as you can out of the network. So the major change, I think, is that the end-user experience has become the focus of the optimization. And it makes sense when you think about it, because the mobile networks exist to provide a service to the subscribers. So what you want to maximize is the experience from a subscriber point of view. But, and it's not that before operators didn't care about that, but what is changing is the fact that it is possible for the operators now to specifically optimize on the quality of experience from the subscriber point of view in a way that is not linearly dependent from the basic KPIs. And this is different from before. So operators have a choice in what they want to optimize, and and that depends on what kind of applications, what kind of users they have on the network, where those users are, what does their network look like. So there is the interaction of many more elements. And so from a technology point of view, operators have new tools, but it's not so much, well, not only they have the new tools, but they have more flexibility in using them. They also are increasingly able to optimize in real time, to take into account the network conditions, but that also increases the complexity of the optimization. And once you have all this real-time data, the question is what is relevant, what is not, how to avoid the unnecessary complexity, and how instead to take advantage of this flexibility. And clearly automation is needed, but in order to automate, you need to first understand what are the network conditions and how to work with it. The one way to think about it is that it used to be that subscribers would use the network to the extent that it was capable of meeting their needs. So you try your best, and you know that the network is not going to be perfect, and you go from there. And it was the subscriber adapting to the RAN. Now I think that we're seeing a reversal. So it's the RAN that has to work in the best way to make the subscriber happy, to optimize the subscriber experience, and there are multiple ways to do that. So and that creates a three-part, if you wish, structure. So on one hand, we have the subscribers. They're trying to use the network, whichever way they see fit. Is what different the different devices, different applications. Cost becomes an consideration as well. And then there are the network resources. What is it the network can do? What's the best way to accomplish this? But in the middle, and an increasingly important role, is the operator's strategy in deciding how to bridge between these two, between the subscriber demand and the network resources. And it's important to do that because neither are fixed. So the subscriber demand can change based on the operator's strategy, and the operator's strategy might change not what the network resources are like, not at least in the short term, but how the network resources are used. And what that means is that the operator can actively play an active role in determining this equilibrium. And so they can encourage use of some applications versus others. And the network might facilitate that by by optimizing it in different ways. Now, in the report, I go over 9 different shifts that are listed here that are changing the way we optimize the network. And it's all into this sort of a frame of the network is evolving, the way we use the network is evolving, and the way operator can optimizing is evolving at the same time. And so I'm going to, during the webinar, I'm going to go over these aspects, and the report will go through them as well. I think that one of the main take-home messages here is that in the RAN, we're not trying to just maximize capacity anymore. It's how you use that capacity. It's the way you prioritize, you manage traffic. It becomes more important. The way that you allocate traffic to different networks or different layers in your network, and so it all becomes more complex. But this complexity also hides an opportunity in not only differentiated from other operators, but also in making a more efficient use of the resources. So the first one is a shift to a world that focuses on quality of experience. As I said before, it seems like it's the obvious thing to do, and it's not that operators didn't care before, but the question now is the opportunity now is that operators can look and try to quantify the quality of experience from the subscriber point of view, and use different metrics to capture that. However, and that's where the complexity it comes in, and that's where optimization is changing, is the fact that the QoE metrics that you get from the subscriber end do not map linearly into network KPIs and even less into RAN KPIs. So, for instance, you might have a RAN that works perfectly well, and yet subscribers aren't happy. It could be because there is congestion. That's that could be a situation. So you have maximum capacity, you use maximum your capacity, but the subscribers still do not get the best experience. And there are other ways in which there could be a problem. The sources of bad experience could be anywhere in the network, so you need to understand where any issue comes from. So what needs to be done is to gather all the, and this is what operators are increasingly doing, is to gather metrics from the UE, from the subscriber end, look at network KPIs. They're still extremely valuable because they provide you with a measure of how the network, the different elements in the network perform. But then we need to go and understand the KPIs on the application level, because the KPIs for each applications are different. Video, voice, best efforts data, or other type of data have clearly different requirements and map very differently into the subscriber experience. And then, if you look at it from the point of view of the RAN optimization, extract all of that to understand what those KPIs, what those QoE metrics mean in terms of RAN optimization, how to then optimize the RAN based on that. So it's much more complicated than just optimizing within the RAN, taking into account only the information in the RAN. The RAN has to listen to what happens beyond itself. So there is a shift to new KPIs to measure performance. Here I just put a few of them. Like for instance, end-to-end latency, round-trip time, web page download time. There are many more. This is just an example to give a sense of where is it I'm heading to. Those were clearly metrics that were not useful when it was dominated. The network was dominated by voice, but now they are much more relevant because different types of traffics have different requirements. Not only that, it's not only the metrics, but also how we look at this data. So geolocation is becoming also quite important because we need to know where the subscribers are. So it's not only what their experience is, but where they are getting that experience. That is crucial when it comes to RAN optimization, because just the average across your footprint doesn't tell you anything, because there is so much variability, and we'll get to that later. So it's important to know where are the users within the coverage area. Are they at the edge or indoors, outdoors? All of that. Crowdsourcing is becoming also increasingly important, and this is basically a mix of geolocation and QoE measurements. It gives you a crowdsourcing type of input where every subscriber becomes a live tester. There is a continuous testing, and that's something that is changing. That instead of having the initial testing and then you go into commercial operations, the network dynamically changes continuously. So initial testing is still important, but it's not sufficient. You need to continuously monitor and optimize the network. And so the importance of location stresses the fact that the average do not capture well the issues that we're trying to address here. It's not, it could very well be that the average is pretty good, but there are a few subscribers that have a bad experience. It's important to focus on those and understand where they are, what is causing the problem. But in order to do that, you also need to make sure that you don't get so at such a low level that you cannot possibly investigate every call or every session that has a problem. So you need to generalize. You need to have some level of abstraction, but understanding what that level is, the right level, is a big challenge. Another dimension is whether you are dealing with an OTT applications versus an operator-managed application. This is particularly the case with voice. If you have OTT voice, switch voice or VoLTE, or if the traffic is encrypted, which most of video traffic is these days, that adds some more complexity in how you qualify, QoE and how you determine what causes potential issues. And the performance issues don't necessarily rise in the RAN or in the core of the mobile network. The devices can be the bottleneck, or anything outside the mobile network. So it's it's more complex, but that's what determines the QoE, the user experience, and so there is in a way no way to avoid this. Because the network is changing continuously, there is a shift that has to happen towards real time, and this is because the network, the usage of the network, the traffic distribution changes dramatically over space and time. There is a high concentration of traffic in some areas, times of the day, but then if you go down along the temporal dimension, there is a lot of spikiness of the data. So even if you are, let's say, a capacity or the network is congested, there are still peaks and valleys. And so it's important for an operator trying to optimize the network to take this into account and use it, well, if as much as possible, use it to their advantage, or to try to limit any potential issue that arises from that. And so the network infrastructure has to change dynamically, but that's easier said than done. First, before you change the way the network works, you need to understand the changes. You need to understand understand what's going on, and then address the issues as they happen. In some cases, because they're non-predictable, but also it's important to identify the bottlenecks before they affect performance and prevent them. Now, what that means is that you need to use, to some extent, you can do that by using historical data. So if you know that there is a game, you know that you're going to see a spike in usage. But you also need to be able to adapt in a dynamic way. So there are some signs that will suggest that congestion is about to happen. So you need to be predictive based on real-time data, not just historical data or knowledge about the world that you might have. So it is important to keep in mind that the network changes dynamically. The RAN increasingly can change dynamically as well, but the two need to go hand in hand. So as I said before, also all this requires some automation. And this is not to say that manual intervention and manual optimization is going to go away. There is still a need for historical data for forecasts when you plan your network, when you want to expand capacity. But then as you go, as you progress into the optimization and you go more and more into the real-time part of it, then the automation is necessary, because there are too many elements. So the RAN is becoming more complex, more dense, There are many more things that you can tweak. So from a purely deployment infrastructure point of view, there are more things that an operator can do, and there are more inputs that are going to affect what is being done, and it's just not feasible to have somebody that does it manually. So and this is something that I've heard from both operators and vendors, that automation, it's really the key enabler. Without automation, a lot of these changes is just simply not possible. So automation is no longer an option, it's an absolute requirement. But in order to use optimization, it's necessary to gain comfort that the automation works, and the willingness to give up some control over the tweaking that you need to do. So that is taking time. Now here, this is another dimension, which is sort of more from the infrastructure point of view, is that when you look at the RAN is no longer what used to be, which is, well, it's still largely like this. It's a set of macro base stations, and they might be using a different access technology, but they're all pretty much the same. You might have some DASs, you might have some femtocells, but by and large, the network is still dominated by macro networks, by macro cells. What we're seeing is that moving forward, we are going to have a continuum of solutions, many more elements, many more types of elements, and those elements are in different layers. So that's the whole idea of of head nets. But when you look at it from the point of view of the optimization, you can see that it's the complexity again escalates, because you need to understand what you have and how everything that you have in your RAN is affected by QoE end-to-end measures. And so this is quite complicated. And what this graph is trying to show is the fact that there is a continuum of solutions in terms of virtualization, whether the infrastructure is indoors, outdoors, is more or less centralized. It uses licensed or unlicensed spectrum, what kind of business model you have, how much power. All of this make a big difference, and because of the complexity that you're seeing, this is a transition that is necessary to accommodate the traffic demand, but it's also a slow one because it's a complex one. And this slide shows you how this sort of this scheme can show how different solutions. Here I have a residential femtocells, a lamppost outdoor type of installation, a mall, and a CRAN. And so the question here from an optimization point of view becomes, what kind of traffic do you want to put through each of these elements, whatever they are present? Obviously, they're only a tiny subset of them will be present in each location, but how do you manage it? How do you manage, for instance, the balance between licensed and unlicensed? What kind of traffic do you want? Where do you want your voice traffic to go? Macro, small cells, unlicensed, Wi-Fi. And if you use unlicensed, how do you want to do it? Do you want to have Wi-Fi? Use Wi-Fi? Do you want to use LAA, LWA? There are different options there. So all of this is coupled with the fact that the operators want to increase resource utilization, and this is obviously to make sure that you get more performance from basically the same investment. And there's multiple tools that allow operators to do that. So there is, from a technology point of view, there are a lot of enablers in this direction. This is this is really crucial in terms of enabling all of this, but also they create, again, more opportunity to customize the network, but also and to get more out of it. But again, makes it much less trivial because it's not a single linear relationship as it used to be. Now, this is another dimension that I think it's important to keep in mind, and I'm talking about voice here, but I think that sort of raises a more general point. Traditionally, it's a reliability, especially when it comes to voice. It's important, the number of drop calls is a crucial measure, crucial KPIs. How reliable? How reliable is a handoff, and things of that nature. And they're clearly still important, but voice is really becoming a data application, not just from a network point of view. With VoLTE, it's an IP application. Data is voice. It's just like any other application from a network point of view. Well, it's a more complex one, but it's all IP based. But I think that what we're seeing, which is in a way quite interesting, is that subscribers are starting to treat voice as a data application in the way they behave. And in fact, sometimes voice becomes a secondary to data. So increasingly, people use voice less, and it's not a question of cost, because oftentimes voice is included, so they don't pay any extra for voice. But they use voice as a follow-up of some communication that starts with data. And I think that the data here showing the WhatsApp voice interface, voice traffic, is interesting, because when I first heard about it, I thought, well, why would anybody want to use WhatsApp for voice when they have a phone to do that? And when you think about it, it's because if you use WhatsApp for texting and you need to call somebody, you probably have text them before. So voice becomes part of the data experience. Now, why does that matter? I think that the reason why that matters from a QoE point of view is that the way we assess voice performance might also be changing and make it more like data. So in the same way that you might try to look at to see video, or to any data application, you might have occasional disconnects, or things might not work perfectly for a few seconds and then they work fine. We might get a similar tolerance for that in voice. And I think Wi-Fi calling can be a good case for it, so that and so what I mean is that subscribers might be willing to trade some reliability of the voice experience for the availability of it. So it's okay to have bad voice coverage rather than have no coverage at all. And so what that might do is that might encourage operators to review the way they look at optimizing voice traffic as well. So we might see some change in the way we optimize traffic, in the way that we perceive the use of a service, of an application. Voice in this case, but it could be anything. Another change that is having, I think, an impact on the way we optimize the network is related to the trend towards virtualization. So from the RAN, you have the trend to CRAN and vRAN, and from the network point of view, you have a trend towards virtualizing. That what that does is that in one way, it makes location irrelevant, in the sense that you can host your functionality wherever you want. So in a way, the mobile network becomes less sensitive to location, but in many ways, location becomes more important, because you can because the mobile operator can put the functionality wherever it wants, and the location does make a difference. Even though you can instantiate it in the same hardware, regardless of where you are, there are some there is some functionality that works better if you push it towards the edge, and some that works better if you put it towards in a centralized location. And this is what we're seeing with mobile edge computing, caching towards the edge. And there are some solutions that are really working at the interface between the RAN and the core. And so there is no more the distinction between RAN and core as two separate entities, each one doing its own thing. It becomes really more like the two are merged. And so when you optimize one, you have to take into account what the other one is doing. So it's no longer two different islands. Then the shift to IoT is the last one, that the last shift that I'm talking about here. This is interesting because we all know there's going to be more devices. But more devices, it's more than just having more devices. It's not just having more traffic. The devices are going to have different requirements, and some might be tied to subscribers. So, for instance, a car might be tied to a user, and that creates a whole set of devices that are tied to the same individual. And so the question is, how do you direct traffic there? And others that are not tied to individuals, and some are fixed, some are mobile, some are high bandwidth, require high bandwidth, some not. Some have real requirements in terms of availability, some are not. And so all of this creates a whole, again, it creates more of a scope for optimization. And in one sense, it creates more complexity, more work to be done, but also enables mobile operators to use the resources that they have with more flexibility in many cases, because they can prioritize or manage traffic in a more active way. So in conclusion here, this is just summarizing what I've said before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I think that what we're seeing is the evolution towards an optimization that really looks not just at maximizing the number of bits that you can push through the network, but to understand what impact they have, how they affect different devices, applications, users, the policy and the strategy from the network perspective. And so this is really changing the targets of the purpose, basically, of the optimization. And so what we're in this, we're seeing much more of an importance of location, real time, and automation becomes essential in order to keep up with all this the complexity. From a network point, from an infrastructure point of view, the question is, how do you allocate different types of traffic, different traffic flows to different parts of the network? How is that going to change when you have a virtualized architecture that gives you even more flexibility? And so let me see. So this is sort of the main I think take-home messages here. RAN optimization is no longer something that you can do within the RAN in ignoring everything else. It's an end-to-end effort, and so it's important to understand what is the experience that the end users have, and if there is a problem, where is this problem coming from? Because it can come from anywhere. And regardless of where it comes from, when you look at the RAN, the question is, how can the RAN compensate for that? Because it could be something that is not really, the problem might not be caused by the RAN, but the RAN might sort of improve the situation. And so the question from a RAN optimization point of view is how to improve the subscriber experience. And in order to do that, we need to look at different metrics and map them onto the network and understand what the relationship is. And but the crucial one of the main challenges in doing so is to use all the data that is available, all the tools that are available, without becoming victim of the complexity. And I think that this is where right now, as an industry, we're doing more of the learning. Where are the challenging, and that's where it sort of slows down to some extent the adoption of many of those tools that are available, but they are not yet as widely deployed as we wish they are, because it takes time to understand the full implications of where this is leading. It's important for everybody involved, vendors, operators, to make sure we fully understand the implications of moving to a situation to a more to a form of optimization that relies more on automation. And to understand what the choices are in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of run, in terms of allocating the traffic into different parts of the network or different layers. So this is all from me, and so this is I will give a brief overview of the interviews. And this is I read the report, and I don't write the interviews, but I always feel that in many ways the interviews are the most interesting part of the overall report, because those are lengthy interviews where I try to get the perspective of different vendors that work in different parts of the value chain, and they're usually absolutely great in providing insight into what is it they see from their viewpoint. So taken together, they really provide a much wider view that complements the report and informs it to a large extent. So it's quite interesting to read them all and to see that as you go through them, there are some things that come up over and over again, because they are, I think, the ones that are more center of mind these days. So let me go through them. So the first interviews was with ASCOM, and here we talk about how QoE metrics can be used to optimize the RAN dynamically in real time or near real time. About real time doesn't have to be at the sub-millisecond level. There is a question of finding the right time. What is the right time? Way to use the information that we have to maximize the improvement of performance without doing too much or without doing too little. And this is something we talked about it in this interview with other things. You will be able to get the slides, so you can read in more detail the information here. Also, the interviews are already available for download. The second one was with Astilia, and here, again, we talked about real time, and the focus was to look at the end-to-end performance and try to understand what goes on in every step. The network changes, but we need to have an end-to-end view to understand what goes on where. Even in a completely virtualized network where everything can happen everywhere, it's important to understand where is the logical place where an issue might arise, or where performance is facilitated. Then we talked to Fujitsu, and here the focus was more on the CRAN environment. What does it mean when you have a CRAN type of architecture? What does it mean to optimize the network? And when you have automation, what do you do? So and all of this require a fundamental move in terms of the way we operate in the network, and that's a big change for an operator. Okay, then with Vazona, we talked about a solution that sits between the edge and the core, and that sort of goes back to the issue of core and run are no longer completely separate islands, and here we have something that sits in the middle and allows you to look at the traffic, look at the spikiness of the traffic, and to the extent that the mobile operator can take advantage of it to increase the network resource utilization, and also to, at the same time, to optimize the quality of experience. And this is especially true with video, which is the type of traffic that it's growing more in popularity, but it's also the most difficult to manage, especially at the rate at which we're consuming it. With Viavi, we talked about again end-to-end solutions, and this is, as you can see, that's a topic that continues to come up because it is really important that, especially with the introduction of headnets, the networks become more and more dynamic. The networks continue to change. And this is something that it's new, and in fact, it's something that, in many ways, is just starting right now. Not only you have different networks, but those networks are more closely integrated with each other. With Telstra, again, we talk about automation again. As you see, that's a popular topic, and here, this is in a network where you have small cells. The number of cells and interaction between those cells is such that again, you need to have automation to get the best out of the network. And what else? And then our final interview is with Telus from Canada, and here we talked about again, small cells, CRAN, IoT. How are those changes in the RAN affecting the way we optimize it? And with IoT, for instance, you start having potentially so many devices, and to manage them, it's very difficult because we're getting in traditional smartphone business. What we've been trying, the trend in the industry is to having devices that carry more and more traffic. Each device carries more traffic. Here we're just going to go the other direction and having many more devices, and managing each device has clearly an overhead to take into account. So this is all from me. Again, the report is going to be ready available on December 1st, and you can download it from RCI Wireless News and SENZA FILI websites. And what I would like to do now is to have Kyle see if there are any questions. I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, Monica, a great presentation, and we've received quite a few great questions as well. And again, if anyone has any other questions, just submit them via the control panel, and we'll try to get to them. If not, I'll share them with Monica. So, Monica, the first question we've got in is in regards to one of the more somewhat controversial topics we've seen this year, unlicensed spectrum. So, with the increased use of unlicensed spectrum, will that change the way operators will need to optimize the RAN?
Yeah, that is going to be a major ground for optimization, because I give you one example. With the 3G in the 3G network, if you have Wi-Fi, and you can say everybody just uses Wi-Fi because it's a faster network, that might work. But when you get to a situation where you have 4G, that doesn't work anymore, because if everybody uses Wi-Fi, then the 4G network is empty. So it's very important to manage the two in a way that you get the best performance, and you might want to have some applications, for instance video, to go over Wi-Fi because Wi-Fi is a better interface for that, but then to keep voice on the cellular network. So there is a question of which users should be on one or the other, which applications, and how the location, the condition of the RAN on that location are. So if Wi-Fi has a good performance, more traffic should go on Wi-Fi. But if the cellular network, or if the cellular network is congested, try to offload as much as you can. But otherwise, you might want to go the other way around if Wi-Fi is congested. Now, if an operator starts using LAA or LWA, so those are technologies that allow mobile operators to basically use the LTE interface or the Wi-Fi interface in a much more integrated way with their network, then the optimization is somewhat easier in the sense that the allocation of network resources to either is more straightforward because the operator has visibility in both networks. It's easier for the operator to manage the two. But there's still a lot of choices that the operator has to make in terms of not only allocating it, but what is the strategy in doing so.
Okay, great. So we received quite a fee questions about QoE or quality of experience. So the first one, QoE is to some extent a subjective way to assess performance. Isn't that a limitation of its usefulness?
Well, yes and no. It is. MOS is also a sort of subjective measure of performance, and ultimately you're trying to make your subscribers happy. So to some extent that's a good thing, and it might change. Again, as I was talking about the perception of voice, we should also keep into account that the way people perceive the quality of the service might change through time. So from an operator, you need to be open to that. But what that also means that, for instance, in different markets, you might have different types of expectations of how the service works. But what that means is that when you try to map those metrics, those metrics into your network, you have to be aware that of changing them, of how the mapping change and how that affects the way you optimize your network. So I guess that what it does, it makes the optimization again a little bit more subtle, but that's exactly what you want to do. To make sure that you keep your subscriber happy, whatever makes them happy.
Yeah, and kind of a related question on that. So if a subscriber does have a bad experience with, say, video, how do we find out what is the cause of the bad experience?
Well, that is exactly the issue in terms of how do you know? It could be that the handset is having some issues. It could be that the video there is some problem with getting the video content from the internet. So and this is why it's important to have an end-to-end view so that you're able to map the experience. So there is a problem. The video keeps stalling. Where is that coming from? So the operator can then go and see in different parts of the network using more of a probe type system, which is more closer to the it's basically a traditional way of monitoring the network to understand where the problem comes from. Obviously, you have to do it at some level, so you cannot just focus on each single call. And then, well, you can start that way, but eventually you have to generalize the results, and then that will give you a better sense of where the problem is coming from. But it's not true, because the very same issue, the very same type of experience might be caused by completely different causes, and that's where I think right now that's one of the big challenges in trying to understand better how can we simplify the relationship between QoE and network KPIs? But we also have to keep in mind that it's not going to be a fixed relationship.
Okay, you mentioned about the mapping there. So can we develop a fixed mapping of QoE metrics into network and RAN KPIs?
Yeah, so not really, in the sense that there's not going to be a one-to-one relationship. Again, like stalling time. If the video stalls, it could be multiple causes. But I think that we are a lot of the vendors and the operators are working to understand what are some regular patterns of behavior of the experience of behavior of the network and the devices, so we can get a better sense of not only what might be the cause of a bad experience or good experience, or what might promote better experience, but also in trying to prevent any situation from in the future from happening. So if you understand what are the dynamics in terms of when something goes wrong, what's going on, and if something works well, what makes it possible, it's possible to have a better sense in terms of guessing what the problem is without having to go through all the motions. And but also equally important is the fact that you can start predicting ahead of time. This is what's going to happen next because I've seen it happening before, and then you can use you can predict future issues and try to take care of them before the issue arises.
All right, looks like we have time for just about two more questions. This one we got in was really good. It's do you see capability in LTE and Wi-Fi standards to support application-based KPI reports by the users to RAN?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be, it is, but it's not necessarily, okay, let's put it this way, it's not necessarily linked to the LTE or Wi-Fi air interface. It's something that sits logically in between. So the air interface, it's completely opaque to what goes on from the point of view of the device and the QoE. But there are ways to get all that information and see how that relates to the interface. So, for instance, if you have a situation where a device, if let's say the problem is in the device, then you might try not, you might keep that into account the moment you do the transmission. So there are ways in which you can manage traffic in a way that optimizes the performance. So, for instance, one way is if you use, for instance, and antenna tilting. You might tilt the antenna in different ways, and typically you don't have good and bad type of outcome. It's a mix. Something gets better, something gets worse. So for a lot of the RAN parameters, you might see something similar. So you change the parameter, and some subscribers get a better experience, some get a worse experience. So the question is that how you want to keep not necessarily the average, because they're not necessarily going after the average performer or the average experience, but how can you maximize the type of experience, the quality of experience for the application or for the users that you care most about. There is a question of it's not better or worse only. It's what kind of behavior in the RAN is preferable given the outcome that you want to see.
All right, great. Looks like we have time for just one more question. So as we move more into more and more integration of HetNets and small cells, is the overall role and relationship of planning, testing, monitoring, and optimizing changing?
Yeah, I think that these are good days if you are in this business, because it's becoming more important, because the network, since the network keeps changing, you have to keep testing, you have to keep monitoring much more aggressively than in the past. And there is more of a scope for optimization because there are more things that you can change, more things that you can try. So it becomes much more of a part of running the network. So it becomes more part of the operations rather than something you do on top of the operation to keep track of the operation. So it becomes sort of more integrated. The one thing that I would say is that it becomes much more important to do the testing, to have to shift a lot of the testing emphasis on real time, real life commercial networks, real usage. So get out of the lab and be more in the outside world because there is much more variability. It's impossible to or very complex to simulate all sorts of situations that might arise because there's much more variability out there. So you still want to do, obviously, some of the initial testing is going to still be done in the lab, but it's not going away. But I think that we're seeing an increasing need for ongoing testing and monitoring and using real data from real handsets.
Okay, that's about all the time we have today. Just a reminder to everyone in the audience that on December 1st, we will be publishing the complete comprehensive report that goes in tandem with this webinar. And we have been publishing the individual transcripts for the last 2 weeks now, and we are continuing to publish them over the next week or so. So go to rcrwireless.com. Right on the menu bar, you can find the Analyst Angle section. And then from that drop down, you'll find Monica Polini and SENZA FILI listed there. Check that daily as we have transcripts going live every day. Again, today's webinar was the Smart RAN, Trends in the Optimization of Spectrum and Network Resource Utilization. And our presenter today was Monica Polini, President and founder of SENZA FILI Consulting. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.